Hello again and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to read to you from my series, my epic fantasy series, Chaos and Creation, The Coming of Darkness, Chapter 2, Arthur's Burden. John helped Arthur into bed. They had both been drinking. As John was about to leave, Arthur began to call out, "No, no, not now, don't, I can't. I don't know, leave me alone." John stopped in his tracks and turned back to find Arthur struggling to breathe, mouth open wide, gasping. "I can't breathe. Let me go. I don't know. I told you." Arthur kicked off his bedclothes and struggled to sit up, but he couldn't. He was pinned down. "No, no, be gone now. Go. Leave me alone. In the name of Rowena, go. It's all right, Arthur. It's just a dream. Wake up," John said as he shook Arthur gently. Arthur sat bolt upright, sweating, breathing heavily. "John? John?" John had put his hand on Arthur's shoulder. "It's fine. You had another nightmare. You can go back to sleep now." Arthur was sweating and breathing heavily as he looked at John, wide-eyed in the darkness. "They're looking for us, John. They're coming. They're going to kill us. They're going to kill us all." Seeing Arthur this way was frightening even for John. "It was a nightmare, Arthur. That's all, a nightmare," John said, trying to reassure him. Arthur was exhausted. John waited quietly, not sure what to do. Arthur's words echoed around John's alcohol-befuddled brain as he slowly shook his head. What should he do? Thankfully, Arthur slowly lowered himself back onto his bed. John waited. Arthur seemed to settle. Arthur's nightmares had grown worse, more disturbing it seemed. John waited a few moments to be sure Arthur was asleep, then quietly took himself off to bed. Arthur Wolfhart. Arthur woke up to the sound of the cockerel. He lay still for a moment, then sat up and rubbed his head. Once out of bed, he paused to stand before the opened shutters. He shook his head to clear the memories of the nightmare, the repeating horror that had only recently come into his life. John had told him that fresh morning air would help him to recover from the effects of too much ale. He had hoped it would cleanse his mind of the dark shadows that haunted him. Unfortunately, his nostrils were blocked by hard, dark blood, so he opened his mouth and gulped in the cold air. It worked. He felt his head begin to clear. His thoughts turned toward his visit. Somehow, this time he felt it was particularly important. Everyone had been talking about it, about his arrival, looking forward to it even. All summer, there was little else Pa could think about. Yet, as the summer grew old and the time had drawn near, he felt a growing sense of unease. He tore himself away from the window. He needed to find himself, needed to clarify his thoughts. At last, as the first son of the House of Wolfhart, he had been called to the council. He was to become an officer of the mark by right of bloodmark. Arthur had often wondered about his heritage. He had felt it in his bones. Royal blood ran through his veins. He often wondered if it was the reason for his madness. For as long as he could remember, his father had been a passionate advocate for the return of the monarchy. He was convinced that only the return of a king could unite the lords of the Aldermark against the imperial imposition of Vaterian rule. His was the only family with an undisputed claim to the throne. He wondered how it might be if he were to inherit the power of his ancestors. Lost in his thoughts, he dressed quickly in the half-light and stumbled noisily down the wide wooden stairway towards the kitchen. Most of the household was still asleep, except for Ubi. Ubi was a treasured member of the household, who, as usual, was up early to set the fireplaces. He called out to her to let her know he was going out, before grabbing a piece of cheese and a chunk of stale bread. Pushing the cheese into his leather bag and holding the bread between his teeth, he tucked his shirt into his woolen breeches and made off towards the stables. As he stood alongside the well, taking a deep draught of icy cold water from the bucket, he heard a familiar voice. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" He turned and peered into the morning gloom. "John, you're up early." The outline of a broad, muscular man with a dark beard and shaggy hair slowly emerged from the eerie mist. "I'm always up early, ale or no ale." Arthur frowned. "My head hurts." John smiled as he walked towards him. "Never mind your head. How's your nose?" Arthur touched his nose gingerly. "Sore. What happened? You don't remember?" Arthur shrugged. "You know, I never remember. What did the other fellow look like?" John tilted his head and smiled. "To be honest, you didn't stand a chance." Arthur shook his head slowly. "Did I start it?" John nodded, but chose to change the subject. This mist should begin to lift soon enough. You take care up there, Arthur. You have a big night ahead of you." John Goodfellow managed a small army of men and women who worked on the homestead to ensure the Wolf household remained happy and well preserved. He could not claim blood mark to the House of Wolfhart, but he was regarded by them as their most trusted servant, as well as a family friend. Although only a handful of years older than Arthur, he was relied upon to support the family and to set an example. Over the years, he had often needed to exercise his authority and had come to be regarded by the boys, at least, as an elder sibling. He had taken Arthur under his wing. Arthur was prone to dark moods. As such, he had taken to drinking. John, for his part, had taken to looking out for him, to mentoring him. It had often led him into trouble. John was very good at dealing with trouble. Arthur threw his saddle over Brutus, his favourite tug. Tugs were a powerful breed of horse reared on the estate for size, strength and durability. Arthur was tall and a skilled horseman, so he had no trouble getting up into his saddle. "I'm going up the valley, John. I need to clear my head." John stepped back a couple of paces to allow the big tug room to turn. "Did you speak to your mother?" Arthur slapped his hand on his forehead, wincing as his palm glanced at his swollen nose. "Oh, John, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting. My head's full of, well, you know, and there's water. I've got the council meeting tonight, and well, once I get all of that out the way." John hid his disappointment and shrugged his broad shoulders. "Don't worry. I'm sure you'll get around to it." Arthur tried to reassure him. "John, look, I'm sure Ma will be fine with it. I'll mention it as soon as I get a chance. They're just so busy, what with the feast and all." John nodded. "I know you will. When the chance arises." There was an uncomfortable silence before he changed the subject. "You taking the dogs out then? I could do with the exercise." "Good idea. I'll just take Rafe and Sissy, though. I don't want to set them all off." Rafe and Sissy were the pack leaders. "That's up to you, Arthur. I'll see to the others later. You'd better get yourself gone. Clear your head, eh? And, be careful. The ground is still pretty hard." "Yes, I will." "Could you get the hounds out for me?" A short while later, Arthur was kicking at the flanks of his massive tug, calling back as he did so, "Tell Mam I'll be back in time to attend to my chores." Arthur nodded and called back, "I will." He presumed Arthur had not told him about last night either. "Don't be too late, mind, or I'll be getting a telling off too." It took a while before Arthur was above the mist. Looking back over his shoulder, he could see sparks coming out from the tallest chimney. The fire in the hearth of the main kitchen was being raked over in readiness for the busy day ahead. The thought of breakfast made him hungry, and he fumbled around in his carry bag for a chunk of cheese he'd placed in there earlier. As he did so, his fingers came upon something cold and hard. Closing his hand around the object, he pulled it out of the bag and flipped it over a few times. He wondered where it had come from and who made it. It had been covered in mud when he first found it up in the High Valley earlier last summer. Since then, he had given it a good clean, and he usually kept it in his pocket. He was intrigued as to how it had come to be in the High Valley. It was a round metal amulet with a tree symbol stamped into it on one side and what appeared to be a dragon on the other. Above the tree was a pattern, or perhaps raised runes that he could not fathom. He had not told anyone about it, not even John. Suddenly his hunger intruded into his thoughts. Placing the object back into his bag, he pulled out the cheese and pushed it into his mouth before tearing off a piece of bread. The hounds looked up and sniffed the air. They were hungry too. Arthur broke off a piece of the bread for each of them and cast it to the ground, where they greedily seized upon the morsel. His hunger gradually subsided as he made his way steadily up the hill towards the place where he had discovered his curious treasure. He had no real idea what he was looking for, but he had been returning to the High Valley, to the same spot ever since, scanning the ground up ahead. Something caught his eye. In the distance, a dark figure, perhaps two, moving quickly, then gone. As he climbed down into Longvale, Warder could just make out the faint sound of the hounds barking excitedly somewhere below him. The shadow of Ash Mountain had begun to retreat up the valley as the morning sun peeked over the northern ridge. A short while later, in the remaining shadow, he caught sight of a slim young man, his fair hair hanging loosely on his shoulders, sitting astride a great white tug. Two large hounds were charging about him excitedly. As Warder watched from above, he could see the young man sitting on top of his broad mount, leaning forward and peering into the densely frosted hedge that marked the extreme border of the house of Wolfhart. He appeared to be searching for something. Warder was soon at the bottom of the steep crag, calling out, Arthur Wolfhart, is that you? I hardly recognised you. You've grown tall. What are those hounds looking so excited about up here in the High Valley? Arthur looked up and was momentarily dazzled by the bright morning sun that surrounded Warder's dark silhouette. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out Warder's tattooed face. He was relieved. Warder? Warder's tall figure stood before him on the raised ground with the sun at his back. He appeared to float in the air. Yes, it's me. Rafe and Sissy barked and wagged their tails excitedly as Arthur greeted his father's old friend. Good day to you. That is all of us. The whole household have been looking forward to your arrival. Welcome back to Longvale, my lord. Arthur spoke in a deliberately loud voice, as if to ensure anyone nearby could hear. Then to himself he said, I knew I heard something. He remained puzzled. Were you down here just a moment or two ago, my lord? Warder was bemused. Arthur had changed while he had been away. He jerked his thumb over his shoulder. No, I've just descended down from the high ridge. I'm on my way down now. Oh, and please call me Warder. Arthur's concern returned. I thought I saw someone dash across this field and into the bushes. The hounds were on to them, I was sure of it. Could it have been a deer or some other creature, perhaps? Warder inquired. Arthur was emphatic. No. If it was, Rafe and Sissy would have taken off. It looked like a man. Two men, perhaps. Trespassers, outlaws, I'm thinking. Warder raised his staff purposefully. Sit tight, Arthur. I'm coming down. If anybody is still in there, I'll flush them out. There was a flurry of long limbs and some loud thrashing about before a few minutes later Warder emerged, accompanied by two very excited hounds, to find Arthur scratching and shaking his head. I must be going mad. Warder thought for a moment. No, Arthur, you did see something, but whatever or whoever it may have been is gone. Arthur shielded his eyes as he surveyed the high ridge from where Warder had descended. Outlaws, then, but not this far south, surely. Let's hope so, Warder said absent-mindedly. Arthur was surprised. What do you mean? Warder followed Arthur's gaze up to the ridge. There are some things worse than outlaws. He saw Arthur was set to inquire further. Let's just say these are strange times, Arthur. We must be on our guard. Spies. The shadowy figures stopped for a moment. Heads cocked and narrow-eyed, they strained to listen to Warder and Arthur's distant voices. They could see both men, heads tilted upwards, scanning the high ridge where they were crouched in the shadows out of sight. Then, as Arthur turned his tug around and pulled Warder up to sit behind him, they set off at an unnatural speed up the boulder-strewn mountain slope towards the top of the high ridge. The taller figure spoke between rapid intakes of breath. We should find a place to stay. It shouldn't be too difficult. Anyone knows anyone will be at the Lord's gathering tonight. His stocky companion nodded. Yes, I'm sick of scavenging for food. All I've got left are a few pieces of dried fish. The two Elohim quickly reached the high ridge and, turning their back to Longvale, gazed down onto the far side of the mountain that overlooked the River Ever. At this time of year, the morning sun had only just begun to shine down upon the upper reaches of the estuary, illuminating the ruddy tiled roof of the infamous Foghorn Inn. That's the end of that chapter. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again. Sorry, look at the camera. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again soon. Please don't forget to like or subscribe to my channel, and please ask me questions. As soon as you start asking me questions, I can start to structure this reading session and give you feedback about how I do. Ask me about how I form my stories, what my methods are, anything you like, any opinions. I'll be happy to share with you. So goodbye for now.